In the early 80s, the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, ABT for short, started making some serious noise. Now, don't get it twisted. They're not the same crew as the original Aryan Brotherhood out in California, but they're definitely a spinoff. Just as grimy, just as dangerous, and straight up copycat vibes, only built for the Texas scene. But to really understand how ABT came to be, you have to rewind the tape a little. Back when Texas prisons started letting black and white inmates mix in the 70s, things got really tense. The old system was built to keep white inmates on top, and when that started crumbling, a storm was bound to come. The guy running Texas prisons at the time, George Beto, had this system called the trustee system. Basically, instead of prison guards doing the dirty work, they handpicked certain inmates called building tenders to keep everybody else in line. And 9 times out of 10, those tenders were white. They held all the power behind bars, like mini wardens with shanks. But in 1980, that whole setup got shut down. A big federal court case, Ruiz versus Sedtal, called it out for what it was: abuse, plain and simple. Once the trustee system died, the prisons turned into chaos. That power vacuum, it didn't stay empty for long. Gangs stepped in to fill the gap, and inmates started clicking up by race, trying to claim their piece of control. White inmates were outnumbered, and a lot of them felt like they were losing grip. So in 1981, some of them, including a dude named Bobby Adams, came together to form a new crew, the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. They looked over at the original Aryan Brotherhood in California, the big dogs of white prison gangs, and tried to link up. Basically asked, "Can we be your Texas chapter?" But the California set shut that down quick. So these Texas boys said, "Forget it, we'll do our own thing." They pulled members from smaller white gangs and united under one name, ABT. They weren't about to be pushed around. From jump, the ABT moved with violence and purpose, trying to bring white power back into the prisons. They saw themselves as the new age building tenders. Only this time, they weren't following nobody's orders but their own. The ABT operates a lot like other white prison gangs. Sure, they push that white supremacist agenda, but at the end of the day, money talks louder than hate. If teaming up with non-white crews makes business sense, they'll do it. That racial ideology is real, but it often takes a back seat when cash is on the line. In the Texas prison system, ABT runs deep. They're one of the most feared gangs behind bars, but their reach doesn't stop there. They've got soldiers on the outside too, handling business all across the state, and just like the OG Aryan Brotherhood, they move with structure and strategy. The way ABT is set up, it's like a machine with 5 main heads, each one running a piece of Texas. Together, they form what's called the steering committee or the wheel. These so-called generals don't just control things behind the walls. They got hands in street operations too. We're talking substances, home invasions, identity theft, and all kinds of organized crime. And when someone inside steps out of line or looks like they're cooperating with authorities, the punishment isn't just a slap on the wrist. We're talking beatings, torture, and sometimes straight up murder. Texas prisons hit a boiling point in the early 80s. In just 2 years, 1983 and 1984, 52 inmates got killed in gang-related violence, and ABT was reportedly responsible for about 1/3 of those bodies. By 1985, they weren't just another gang. They had a grip on the prison system and started calling themselves the Mad Dog. Since their start, officials believe they've been involved in over 100 murders and at least 10 kidnappings. By 2012, the numbers made it clear. ABT was deep in the system. Around 2,600 members were locked up in Texas alone, with another 180 in federal prisons. Some estimates push the total closer to 3,500, with about 1,000 still on the streets. Jason Trooper Hankins, a former member, put it bluntly: "They're everywhere. Every town in Texas has ABT in it, whether you see them or not. And odds are, you won't see them. They're not all bald, tatted up, and stomping around in boots. They know how to blend in. However, one way to spot an ABT member is by their ink if they decide to show it. Some avoid tattoos altogether, just to steer clear of solitary or stay under the radar. But for the ones who do get marked, you might see a sword and shield, swastikas, or just the letters AB. Some go with numbers like 12, 1 and 2, Roman numerals 1 and 2, or even 112%, which they say means 100% Aryan Brotherhood. They've even got hand signs to rep their loyalty, keeping that identity tight whether they are locked up or walking free. Now, back in the day, the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas was all about white power. Their whole thing was separation, keeping to themselves, building up their own, and pushing that white supremacist agenda hard behind bars. But as time went on, that message started to fade into the background. What really started driving them was money. That brotherhood turned into more of a straight-up criminal enterprise, chasing illegal moves over ideology. They still had structure, though. Rules weren't just suggestions, they were laws, and they enforced them with the kind of violence that made people think twice. We're talking murder, attempted murder, setting up hits, beating people down, robbing folks, and making threats that weren't just words. Whether you were a member, trying to get in, or just hanging around their circle, you had to follow orders. And those orders came from the top, so-called direct orders. And once they came down, there wasn't much room for questions. But even with everything they had going on across Texas in the 2000s, substance trafficking, robberies, extortion, one crime stood out. It wasn't just about business, it was personal. They turned on one of their own. A member named Scott Freeman ended up getting murdered in a way that was so brutal, it put a spotlight on just how far the ABT would go to keep control and send a message. On May 4th, 1971, up in the small town of Petoskey, Michigan, Roger and Sally Freeman welcomed a baby boy into the world, Scott Allen Freeman. He came into a home already full of love with three older sisters, Lori Ann Smith, Jody Freeman, and Kimberly Freeman, ready to spoil and protect him. Scott came up in a tight-knit household, eventually finishing school at Onaway High back in '89. After that, he kept it moving, made it through college, and got into the grind as an electrician over at Georgia Pacific. But he wasn't just about the 9 to 5. Whenever he could, he was out in the woods, helping his dad with work or putting in hours at Ralph Walker's sawmill out in Millersburg. Dude stayed working. Most of his life was rooted in Onaway, but in the early 2000s, he packed up and made his way down to Texas. A die-hard sports fan, Scott stayed loyal to the Chicago White Sox and Bears, always catching games when he had the chance. Music and computers were his escape when life slowed down. But somewhere along that road in Texas, things took a sharp left. Scott linked up with the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. Over time, he climbed their ranks and reached the level of major, deep in that world. By October 12th, 2008, Scott was 37 years old and living in Livingston, Texas. That day, he was found dead in Cleveland, Texas, shot multiple times. Detectives immediately launched a homicide investigation, trying to unravel what led to the murder of a man who once just seemed like a small-town kid from Michigan. The cops kicked things off by digging into Scott Freeman's ties to the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, since he was a major in the organization. As they peeled back the layers, they found out the ABT had actually split back in 2002, two separate cliques now beefing with each other. Scott was part of one, and the other was run by a top dog, one of the generals, Stephen Stainless Walter Cook. Now here's where the tension started cooking. Scott kept bringing in fresh faces to build up his side, and that didn't sit right with Stephen or his crew. Every new recruit Scott pulled in was like pouring gasoline on the fire. Things got so heated that Stephen ended up getting the green light to handle it however he saw fit. That meant violence was on the table, beatdowns, even murder. Fast forward to October 12th, 2008. Big day, a crew was supposed to head from Stephen's spot in Rye, Texas, over to Cleveland. Both Scott and Stephen were supposed to be part of that ride, but when it came time to roll out, Stephen pulled a slick move, claimed there wasn't room for Scott in his car, but at the same time, he had Scott's ride pulled over. Scott and another dude named David Jason Michaels were in it. Scott got out, probably thinking it was just a regular stop, and started walking up, maybe to say something. That's when Stephen pulled out and dumped 6 shots into him right there. After that, Stephen and David dragged Scott's body behind the car, left it like nothing happened, and peeled off into the wind. Now, Stephen's stainless Walter Cook wasn't new to the system. He'd been moving reckless since way back in '87. That's when his rap sheet first got stamped with charges like aggravated robbery, regular robbery, crack possession, and stealing firearms. This wasn't some one-off mistake. This was a man deep in the game, running foul with the law for decades. After Scott Freeman got murdered, the feds started connecting the dots, and Stainless's name popped up real quick. They pulled a warrant and hit his spot in Tomball, Texas. At the time, he was already caught with a Romanian rifle, which raised all kinds of red flags, but that wasn't even the half of it. Once they searched the place, they found a full stash, 5 shotguns, a Sterling .380, and a couple more of those Romanian Romarm QGR rifles. Add in 300 rounds of ammo and some body armor, and it was a wrap. Being a convicted felon, holding that kind of firepower, yeah, they scooped him up on the spot. By February 16, 2010, Stainless folded on the gun charge, straight up pled guilty. Come June, he got slapped with 96 months in federal prison, no parole, plus 3 years of supervised release on the back end. But the story didn't stop there. As detectives kept digging, the puzzles started coming together. The deeper they went, the clearer it became. Stainless and his boy David weren't just suspects, they were knee-deep in it. Both got hit with murder charges, conspiracy to commit murder, and using a firearm in a violent crime that ended in death. Fast forward to November 22, 2011, over a year later, and Stainless finally admitted to it all. He pled guilty to the murder and everything that came with it, but it ain't stopped there. By March 16, 2012, he also pled guilty to aggravated assault tied to a brutal beatdown that happened back in 2008. Some ABT prospect pulled up to his spot trying to join the crew and instead got jumped by about a dozen members. The dude walked away, or more like crawled away, with serious injuries all over his body. Then came May 3rd, 2012, and that's when the hammer really dropped. Stainless got life for killing Scott Freeman. Just a few months later in August, they tacked on another 87 months for that brutal beatdown on the ABT prospect. By that point, the running was over. His past had finally caught up to him, and the system made damn sure he wasn't going anywhere ever again. But here's the kicker. The Aryan Brotherhood of Texas wasn't the only crew making waves. Enter the SWS. The SWS, short for Solid Wood Soldiers, is a white supremacist prison gang that runs heavy in Texas, both inside the prison walls and out in the free world. They started way back in the 1990s, deep inside the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. The name might sound like something out of a movie, but it didn't always carry that weight. At first, people called them the Stupid Woods, a joke name that eventually turned into something deadly serious. Over time, they took on other names too, like Separate White State and Solid Wood Soldiers. But no matter what name they go by, they've always been about one thing: power, control, and keeping it all white. Their whole setup mirrors a military chain of command. At the top sits the president, then the vice president, a council, major, captain, lieutenant, and sergeant. Soldiers make up the bottom, but don't let the title fool you. Even they carry out hits, robberies, and assaults. From the outside looking in, it might seem like just another gang, but they see themselves as something bigger. They call it a brotherhood, a wolf pack, a family. And just like any twisted family, they got rules, a full-blown constitution and bylaws that break down every member's role, expectations, and how you get in. Want to join? First off, you got to be white. Then you get labeled a prospect, and an existing member has to vouch for you. From there, it's all eyes on you. They test your loyalty, your discipline, and your willingness to get your hands dirty. You study their codes and history like it's scripture. And if they need you to put in work, which usually means illegal activity, you do it without hesitation. Once they decide you're ready, you get put through a violent beating. They call it blood in. And if you ever try to leave, same thing. That's blood out. Ain't no clean way to walk away from the pack. Whether you're a full member, a prospect, or just someone hanging around, you're expected to ride for them, no questions asked. Orders come down, and if those orders involve violence, you're supposed to move immediately. That's how they maintain respect and keep people scared enough to not step out of line. They got symbols and tattoos that show who's down. Most of the time, you'll see the letters SWS with the S's drawn like lightning bolts, a not so subtle nod to white power. Above that, there's usually a bear claw with the number 4 in the middle, sometimes with the letters HCRL. That stands for honor, courage, respect, and loyalty, the values they claim to live by, even though their actions say otherwise. They also throw around this 14/10 symbol. The 14 represents the 14 words, a white supremacist slogan about protecting the white race. The 10th stands for their own twisted belief. Unity is the only solution to the white man's revolution. On top of that, they got hand signs too, like one where they lock hands to form a W. Most think it stands for wolf pack. Now, the SWS start off with one mission: protect white inmates, push white power, and keep white folks separated. But over time, that mission twisted into something darker. They weren't just about ideology anymore. They were about stacking money, and they didn't care how they got it. Meth, guns, robberies, whatever kept them in control. They used fear, violence, and intimidation to run their operation, and anybody who got in the way caught the consequences. Back in the middle of all this was Craig Phipps, known on the inside as Lone Wolf. He ran SWS like a business, giving out orders from prison, setting up the moves, and expecting results. By 2010, he had a new hustle in motion. He and a man named Christopher Lee Guidry, people called him Hollywood, cut a deal. The plan was simple: raise $30,000 through meth sales and other dirty work. That cash, it was supposed to buy land and build a separatist compound for SWS, a whole community built on hate. Phipps would take full control of that money once he got out of federal prison. Out in the free world, Hollywood and another SWS member named Tanner Lynn Borg, aka Two Shoes, took that plan and ran with it. They set up their meth business out of Vidor, Texas, a place with deep, ugly roots. Vidor sat about 130 kilometers east of Houston, a town with old strip malls, fading storefronts, and a church on nearly every corner, over 3 dozen of them. In the nicer areas, there were wide brick homes and freshly cut lawns. But drive out to the rural parts, and the picture changed real quick. Trailer homes leaned to one side, wooden shacks looked like they were fighting to stay up, and vines dangled from power lines like curtains nobody asked for. Broken washers, busted tires, and trash piles told quiet stories about poverty and storms that never stopped coming. But more than all that, Vidor had a name soaked in racism. The Ku Klux Klan had deep roots there, and the town never really shook that reputation. Around 98% of the town's population was white, way higher than Texas's average. For years, black people would warn each other not to stop for gas in Vidor, not even for a minute. There were stories, real stories, about black families who tried to live there and got pushed out. Texas Monthly once called it the most hate-filled town in the state, and that's where these men chose to build their empire. Between September 2010 and January 2011, a crew of SWS members out in Orange County, Texas, started cooking up shake and bake meth, a low-budget, dangerous way to make the substance. They were selling it around the area, trying to build up their street game, but things took a serious turn in February 2011 when Bork, Guidry, and a few other SWS members started getting close with a woman named Vicky Stark-Fitz. She wasn't officially in the gang, but she had what they wanted: access to crystal meth and guns. Crystal meth, by the way, is like the VIP version of meth, cleaner, stronger, and mostly smuggled in from Mexico. With Stark-Fitz in the picture, these guys started leveling up. Suddenly, they had a better product and more of it. And in the world they were in, that meant more money, more power, and more enemies. Then came James Lee Sedtal, better known as Lil Bit. He got pulled into the SWS while locked up in a Texas jail. Ironically, it was his mother Vivian who turned him in, thinking it might save him from the streets. But that plan blew up in her face. Inside, Sedtal linked up with hardened criminals, and instead of turning his life around, he doubled down. Eventually, Sedtal got out and started working for the gang, running meth deliveries in Orange County. But during one of those runs, he messed up big. He used one of Stark-Fitz's guns to shoot and wound a member of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. That was a move you don't come back from. The ABT was now out for blood, and the tension between the two gangs exploded. For Bork, Guidry, Stanley, and even Stark-Fitz, this was a moment of reckoning. They were trying to hold their positions in the SWS, maybe even move up. And in their world, there was only one way to clean up a mess that big: eliminate the problem. That's when they made the call. To protect themselves and prove their loyalty, they decided to kill Sedtal. In the early hours of March 14, 2011, things hit a deadly turning point. Stanley pulled the trigger and killed James Lee Sedtal at Stark-Fitz's place in Liberty County. Later that same morning, Bork, Stark-Fitz, Guidry, and Stanley loaded up Sedtal's body and drove it out to an old abandoned logging trail in Hardin County. That's where they dumped him. It wasn't until March 23rd, over a week later, that someone stumbled across the scene. A random guy called 911 after finding human remains inside a burned-out car. That's how Sedtal's body was finally discovered. From there, the whole operation started unraveling. The feds, specifically the U.S. Department of Justice, stepped in and went full force. They dropped a heavy indictment that pulled in about a dozen people, all tied to the SWS. It wasn't just the four involved in Sedtal's murder. The net caught others too. People like Craig Phipps, Mikkel Allen Cunningham, aka Mikey, Ricky Allen Nichols, Cassie Diane Hetzel, and Mac Langston Warner. It was a massive takedown. When it came time for Bork to face the music, Sedtal's mother, Vivian, showed up in court to speak her truth. Years earlier, she'd called the police on her son, trying to save him from the streets, but that choice haunted her. She said that the man who killed her son didn't just take his life, he took her best friend. Her words hit the courtroom like a gut punch. She talked about how close they were, how she used to confide in him, how that big-hearted kid she loved now sat silently in a box by her bed. It was raw and it was heartbreaking. As for Vicky Stark-Fitz, the woman at the center of it all, she eventually pleaded guilty. She admitted to her role in the SWS's whole operation, moving meth, scheming murders, and being part of a full-on racketeering enterprise. The court didn't take it lightly. A grand jury sentenced her to 31 years. There's a small chance she might live long enough to see freedom, but that all depends on time and health. If nothing changes, her release is set for 2039. By then, she'll be 75. What are your thoughts on this story? Appreciate you watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.